Well, I have to admit, Jeffrey, that your speech in front of the United Nations Security Council did work fine. Because as
Well,
we can see, well, here's the result. At least they started talking. So now they realize that almost for a year to keep silence is no longer possible. So they came up with some funny explanations. Now we know that it's okay. It takes only 6 people with funny documents, but those funny documents were so good, but those guys had nothing to do with secret services. They just suddenly, probably on internet, found the perfect documents that allow them not just to rent a boat, but also to carry almost 2,000 pounds of explosive through the whole Europe without anyone knowing. And oh yeah, that was sponsored not by the government, but by some Ukrainian oligarch, whom they do know, but they're not willing to mention his name, not to spoil a relationship with Ukraine. And yes, it's okay. It's no longer a terrorist act, it's just an explosion. Wow, cool guys.
well, it's a little humiliating, I would say, for the U.S. authorities to make up such a stupid story. It's I think we know the United States government blew up this pipeline, and I believe more information will be coming out, day by day or week by week. It's a little embarrassing for the New York Times to run a story like this. It's ridiculous. It has no sources, no information at all. Obviously concocted. I think, aside from all the other absurdity of it, it will really hurt that newspaper, which I used to like, actually, but now basically can barely read because it's not filled with nonsense.
Well, but they're not the only one. Also, the Times and Site, they all support this story. But the worst part about this story, that it turned out that almost a week after the explosion, they already had all the leads. So basically, they're saying that they're not willing to do the investigation.
Well, we already knew that Swedish divers went down and cleaned up the crime scene and then suddenly said, but we won't tell anybody anything about what we saw. We won't tell the Germans. We won't tell the Danes. We certainly won't tell the Russians. We won't even tell the UN Security Council. So this is very sad. The U.S. did something really stupid and irresponsible. This is the overwhelming evidence. And so far, they don't care of the slightest accountability. When I spoke in the UN Security Council, the U.S. ambassador at the Security Council said, we're not interested in an investigation. This is just a diversion from Russia's war crimes and so forth. It's really a terrible situation when we can't have even 5 minutes of grown-up conversation in the UN Security Council about something that's actually quite serious. Nobody should be blowing up infrastructure in international waters because the whole world economy depends on infrastructure in international waters, whether it's the fiber, whether it's energy pipelines, whether it's power transmission. This stuff should not be blown up. This is a very, very serious matter. And that's why it's important to understand what happened, not to play games with it.
So is it a terrorist attack or not? Is this Ukrainian, let's say, oligarch, is he a sponsor of terrorism or not? Because if we do not give answers, even if we follow this stupid version that they are trying to feed us, it's still quite weird. So the person can be sponsor of terrorism for a year. His assets were not frozen. Nothing has been done. So does that mean that it's okay? So should we expecting yet another explosion in some other part of the ocean or on the land? So is it a new era of great wars, terrorist attacks? So that's what they're trying to say.
Yeah, no, of course, this cover story is absurd. It's technically absurd. It's also politically absurd for the reasons you're pointing out. But technically, it's really important to understand that Nord Stream is a big, heavy, thick pipe covered by big, heavy concrete encasement 90 meters below the sea surface. This is a major operation that requires state actors, not 6 people in a sailboat.
And
It's
very
absurd.
special equipment that is
You-
not easy available on the market. You cannot buy it on internet. AliExpress won't deliver it, and you cannot rent it in a little port on the shore.
Aside from the massive amounts of explosives, diving down at this distance requires extremely complex technical skills and technical equipment. Then the remote detonation, the delayed detonations, all of this means that this was an act of a state. I think overwhelmingly likely the United States for the reasons of motive, opportunity, capacity. But if there's some other state, okay, that's what to talk about. But 6 people in a sailboat conveniently that have no ties to any government at all. And then, oh, maybe they're Russians, this is false flag. I mean, they say anything right now rather than have a serious look at the evidence. And this is, because it is a game that they're playing. This is just whatever can be spun on whatever day. But I actually don't think that there's much staying power to this absurd story. It was basically laughed at around the world from the first moment.
But we're all expecting new article from Mr. Hirsch because he started laughing when he was asked for comments on this, the New York stuff, and he's saying that okay.
Yeah, well, I'm a believer in Cy Hirsch. He's been doing his business because people in the security services are unhappy about lots of things that they are asked to do. And that's been a basis of his reporting for decades. And he says that people came forward because they thought that this was really a stupid idea. I couldn't agree more, by the way. And that's why people that were disaffected came forward to explain. Then, even as he released it, he kind of laughed and he said, we're only on first base on this story. For those who don't know baseball, there are 4 bases. So we're at the very beginning of this story. And he's going to release more information, I'm sure. And others will come forward also. So it's really right what you said, that maybe they felt, okay, we need some cover story. And then they came up with something absolutely absurd. And it's even internally incoherent for the reasons you've said, but it's actually incoherent on its face because it's not 6 people in a sailboat.
Yeah, actually, right. But also it looks like it's not enough. And for the United States, it's not enough to be actually almost involved in warfare with Russia. Now they want to have big war with China. And it looks like they started the preparatory job with this new release of new evidence on the origin of COVID. So now they're stating that it's China's fault. As Trump used to say, it's China virus. And so, where it goes to?
Well, this is also a complicated topic. I got involved in that a lot because I chaired a commission about COVID for the international medical journal, The Lancet. And I looked into it at length and spoke with scientists all over the world. I think that it's likely that this virus came out of laboratory research, but pointing the finger only at China makes no sense because actually, ironically, in this case, it was probably joint U.S.-China research, but U.S. technology developed the ways to make a virus more dangerous. So it's started with U.S. technology called gain of function technology which takes a virus and with methods that have been developed in U.S. Laboratories makes the virus more dangerous. Now, nobody knows for sure the origin of the virus, but I would say that it's odds on, well over 50% chance that it came from that kind of research. If so, what I know, and what, of course, is also inconvenient in the U.S. Rhetoric about this, is that the United States was promoting this kind of gain of function research. And it was actually promoting research that aimed almost exactly at creating the kind of virus that emerged, because there are special aspects of this virus. It's a SARS-like virus that has some added components to it that U.S. researchers were investigating. So this is why there's reason to believe that it's quite possibly out of a laboratory. But if so, it's not a matter of simply pointing a finger at China. It's a matter of understanding also what was the U.S. government supporting. And that's what I've tried to ask the questions for a couple of years. I gave testimony to this House investigative committee in the last few days, also saying, here are the questions that need to be asked.
Well, but whom do we ask those questions? It looks like nowadays no one is willing to give any answers. And the only thing that we can say for sure, that the world is moving toward huge war. And
it's interesting.
Unfortunately, you're an optimist, I'm a pessimist, because you think that it can be stopped, and I'd love to be wrong, but it doesn't look like anyone is willing to stop.
For just one point on COVID, it's a little bit like Nord Stream. For the first 2 years, no one would even ask the question. Now they're pointing to China. They have a cover story. But the fact of the matter is, people are at least asking the question. So it's like an analogy to the Nord Stream also. At least people are talking about the fact that a laboratory origin is not some crackpot idea, but actually a very plausible point. But on the bigger picture, where is this world heading right now? It's terribly frightening, because there is a group in the U.S., it includes this administration, the president, Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, others who are the so-called neoconservatives, who believe that the name of the game is U.S. Rule and U.S. hegemony, to use the technical term used in international relations. And that's going to lead us to war, more war. We're already in war over this idea, but it's going to lead us to extraordinarily dangerous war if this idea persists. And right now it is on that path, and it's terribly dangerous. Most of the world wants nothing to do with this, which is the good thing, because most of the world says we don't want one country, the United States, running the world. It's just 4% of the world population. How about actually getting along diplomatically rather than overthrowing governments, going to war, expanding military alliances? Why don't we have diplomacy? That's my thought. And most of the world is on side on that. So you said I'm an optimist. I'm a cautious optimist, because at least most of the world, and I would say most Americans, not most of the American people, don't want war with China, but they're told, well, that's inevitable. That's coming. That's going to come in 2025. This is a relatively small group with a absolutely terrible idea that the world only works if the U.S. runs it. And that's an absurd idea, which I speak about every day. But it is a real idea of this group.
Well, but it looks like they're right now in power. And also, the idea that they have is quite reasonable from their point of view. Like for fighting Russia, they found Ukrainians and they're willing to support whatever it takes, but not people. The same will be with China. They will be willing to support the death of as many Taiwanese as they could find without being involved by themselves. Then will be South Koreans on the east and the Polish people on the west. So America nowadays found the new great idea.
It's
They
true,
can
by the
fight
way.
with their own weapon, and if it takes Europe or Eastern Asia to be burned in the flames of World War, who cares? There will be Americans left.
You know, Senator Mitt Romney.
Exactly, that's my quote.
He actually wrote that last
Yeah.
week. He wrote literally that.
Yeah,
that
that's his
everything's-
article, yeah.
Everything's going fine. It's all fine, you know. All we have to do is keep up a modest amount of spending, $50 billion a year, not very much for a $23 trillion economy, and no U.S. blood shed. And he doesn't mention hundreds of thousands of people dying in Ukraine. So it is shocking to read that article that someone would even put that on paper as an argument. But I think you're right. There are people, obviously, in power in the United States who believe that these proxy wars are a great innovation. Other people die. It doesn't cost very much. You weaken your opponents. It's quite terrifying. But it also raises an obvious point, which is that the obvious loser in this, without question, is Ukraine. So Ukraine should have been the very first to say, we need a diplomatic solution. And a year ago, just now, Zelensky said, we need a diplomatic solution. We need, Ukraine will be neutral. We will negotiate over Crimea and the Donbass. And there was actually progress being made, not just progress, a lot of progress. And then as the former prime minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, said in an interview, at the last moment, the United States stopped it, blocked the agreement. Now, this is the point. Who loses in all of this? It's Ukraine loses first. Of course, everybody loses.
And Europe second. So Americans, they have a win-win situation. Whatever happens, America is far from that. They will financially benefit, and Europe will relocate whatever they have left to the United States, like military-industrial complex. And then they'll have to do something with Ukraine. And Ukraine is a black hole nowadays, economically wise. And Europe gonna sink.
You would think, actually, I do continue to think that Ukrainian leaders and the public are actually going to figure this out. That the worst thing in the world, I'm telling you, the worst thing in the world is to be in a U.S. proxy war. And that is what you try to avoid. And the Ukrainian leaders actually got that a year ago. Okay, the U.S. told them, no way, you keep fighting. So it's been another year. What have they gained out of this? Just a massive amount of death and destruction. So maybe a year on, they will figure out again, my God, this is not working. We absolutely need to return to the negotiating table. This is really the point.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It's always a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. Jeffrey Sachs
Great to be
был
with you.
в
We'll
нашем
continue.
эфире, директор Института